Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel and welcome to my October, November and December wrap up. So, in October I read 11 books, in November I read 10, and in December I read 16. So, we have 37 books to talk about. So, I think I'm gonna give like very brief reviews and just my rating because if I kept talking a lot about each book, we would be here for 2 hours, and I don't think any of us want to be here for 2 hours. So, I'm gonna be talking about the 37 books that I read in the last 3 months. And starting off, we actually have a trilogy, which is the Tawny Man trilogy, which are these three books. And so first we have Fool's Errand, then we have The Golden Fool, and then lastly we have Fool's Fates. And this is part of the realm of the Elderlings universe world, and it is fantasy, and there were two trilogies previous to this one, and this trilogy actually follows the same main character as the first trilogy, which was called the Farseer trilogy. And so basically in this book, like, years have passed since that first trilogy, and the main character is basically like he was, just living his life, chilling, and he is just basically thrown into the mess that he was in the other trilogy that's where we met him. And it was really fun to be back in this world, to be back with characters that I already knew and loved. And we learned more about the magic in this book, and it was like a little slower than I would have preferred, but the ending was like pretty intense, and overall I did have a really good time with it, and I gave it 4 stars. Then in the second book, The Golden Fool, this one, like, I feel like I myself was fooled because nothing happened in this book. Like, the only thing that happened in this entire book is like what is said in the back, and like not as like an introduction to things that would happen later. Like, it just says this. So basically this whole book was an introduction to the next book. And I mean, I still liked it because I like the world and the characters and the magic, and like I just like to be in this world. But definitely not my favorite of the series or like of the universe even. And I think I originally gave it 3.5 stars, but I think it's actually 3 stars. And then finally we have Fool's Fate, and this one was so much more exciting than the previous one because in this one things were actually happening, and we were learning a lot about the magic and the world and like about the past. And it also had like a lot of action. It was pretty crazy, like it was very intense. And yeah, this one I did really, really like, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Then we have Winterset Hollow, which is a horror book, and in that book we were following a main character whose favorite book was called Winterset Hollow, and he and some of his friends and like a whole group of people go on like a trip to the place where that book was set and where like the author had a house. And so they are exploring that place and they kind of get lost. And when they get lost, they find the house where the author was supposed to have lived in. And they also find like the main characters of the book because the book had like a lot of talking animals. And so at first they find the rabbit, who is supposedly the main character of the book. And then the rabbit invites them into his house, and there are a lot of other animals there who are basically like their behavior is like human-like, and they are preparing like a feast and the humans are invited. And then there is an owl, I think, in the garden that warns our main character that he's in danger. And so basically we see them being in danger and how they're in danger and how they're trying to survive. And I didn't really like it. I never really connected to any of the characters, so like I didn't care that they were in danger, and I was never like really that interested in what was happening either. And I was mainly like really bored, and so I gave this one 2 stars. Then I read Imaginary Friend, which was another horror book, and this one, like, I had wanted to read this book for a while, but it's so long, especially for a horror book, that I procrastinated it. But I was doing like a video of reading a bunch of horror books, so I decided that it was time to read that one, and so I read it. And we're following a main character who was a little boy who was called Christopher, and he and his mom had like just moved to a new town because they were basically running from something in their past. and they are still like kind of afraid that they will follow them to where they're going. But they, like I said, moved to a new town, and Christopher, he has dyslexia, and he's also like not really good at math. But one day he like disappears in the woods. I think he's gone for 5 or 6 days, and when he comes back, like he is able to read incredibly well, like even books that are like way advanced for like his age. It would be like for older kids, he can still read them pretty well, and he's also really good at math, and he's like really good at everything, and he's also like extremely lucky. And he says that like when he was in the woods, there was a person who helped him who he calls the good man. And then the good man asks him to build like a tree house, and he asks his friends to build a tree house. And there's like something else in the woods that is basically the good man. Wait, it was not good man, it was nice man, I think. The nice man's enemy, and there is like something that is affecting the whole town. And this one I thought it was like pretty creepy, but it also was like so long, and I think it was longer than it needed to be. It was at times, a little boring, but like overall I still had a good time, and I actually really liked Christopher. And I think it was creepy and kind of scary, but it was just so long, and in the end I gave it 3.5 stars. Then we have The Mercy of Gods and Life Suit, which are books 1 and 1.5 in the Captives War series, which is sci-fi. And so in this book, which is the first one, The Mercy of Gods, we are following a group of scientists, and like the main character is called Dafydd, and he's part of that group. And they live on, like all humans basically, live on a planet called Engine. And no one really knows how they got there, but it is known that humans live on Engine. And they one day they start seeing like something approaching their planet, and then they find out that it's the Carricks. And the Carricks are like another species that is basically like they're conquerors of the universe, and so they conquer other planets and other species and take those other species as slaves. And so they take some of the like top experts at various different fields like with them in their spaceship, and that group of scientists that we were following in the beginning is obviously taken as well, and they are like taken somewhere else, and they're given challenges. And like here in the back of the book it says that Dafydd is poised to become humanity's champion and its betrayer, which sounded very interesting to me, like from the beginning, and I was excited to see what the betrayal was gonna be. And when he got there, like it was even better than I expected. Like it was so good. And I've loved everything that we've gotten to learn so far from the Carricks and the other alien species and like the world. And there's also like an enemy of the Carricks that is like working in the shadows that I am also very interested in. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. I also really liked Dafydd as a main character. He was a very interesting main character to follow. And yeah, I absolutely loved everything. Like I was hooked from page one, and I had a great time. And I gave it 5 stars. And then Life Suit was book 1.5. And in that one, we were following a character who was entering like an army where they had life suits, which were basically like armor that kind of connects to like their skin and their body, and kind of like helps their body work for them. And basically they don't take the suit off, they can't really take it off, and it will like be taken off once they have finished serving for the army. And so we are following those characters, and we are like exploring a little bit more of the world. And then there is like a plot twist they reveal that was so good. I really, really loved this one as well. But this was just like way shorter, so it's not like as impactful as, a full-on novel. But I still really, really loved it. And so I gave that one 4.5 stars. Then we have My Darling Dreadful Thing, which was horror. And in that one, we were following Ross, and she could see ghosts, and she had a ghost actually like attached to her, or bonded, I guess is a better word. And she would perform seances that her mother asked her to perform because her mother wanted to, earn money because of that ability. And she would, like I said, perform those seances, and the ghost that was bonded to her would like possess her, so her performance would be more authentic. And there was a woman who went to one of the seances, and she was called Agnes, and she was there because her husband had just died. And then we learned that she also had like a ghost bonded to her, and she actually wants to take Ross home with her, and Ross is really into that idea because she hated her life there with her mother because her mother was a very, very bad person. And so she goes with Agnes. And then we also have like some sections from the future, I guess, where Ross is talking to a doctor. And we know that someone has died, and Ross is like the main suspect. But she claims that it was one of the ghosts that did it. And so she has to like prove her innocence and also prove that, she's not crazy, like ghosts do exist. But most of the story is set in the past where we are seeing everything unfold. And like this book had everything for me to love it, but I didn't. And I mean, there were like some creepy, kind of weird scenes that were fun, but overall, I didn't really love it. Like, there's nothing that I, can say that I hated about it, but there's also nothing that I really loved about it. It was just okay, and I gave it 3 stars. Then I read Where Sleeping Girls Lie, and this was a mystery. And in this one, we were following Sade, who was going to like a very prestigious boarding school after being homeschooled her entire life. And when she gets there, she gets introduced to her roommate, who's called Elizabeth. And during Sade's first night there, Elizabeth actually disappears. And so people think that Sade had something to do with it, and she's trying to prove that obviously she didn't. But no one really cares to investigate actually what happened. And so Sade and Elizabeth's best friend are the only ones who are actually actively investigating. And Sade also gets the attention of the like group of popular girls, so she's also dealing with that. And like everyone has secrets, like almost everyone at that school, and also even Sade and like her family and her past, there are a lot of secrets. And I love this book. It was really slow, which is not really usually my favorite pacing for a book, but even though this one was really slow, I really, really love the main character, so I guess I was just fine following her, even in a slower paced book. But yeah, I really, really love the main character. I really like the reveals. I really like the main friendship that was formed, and even the romance that was sort of happening, I actually liked, which is rare for me. So yeah, absolutely loved this book, and I gave it 5 stars. Then we have Womb City, which was sci-fi horror, and in that one we were following Nayla, and she was living in a body that was not her own, like it used to belong to someone else. And she was controlled by a microchip, and she was controlled by the police, including her husband because he was part of the police. And they had access to her location and also to her memories. And she obviously didn't have a good relationship with her husband because he controlled her with a microchip. And she actually had a lover who was like, he basically figured out a way to override the microchip so they could be together. And one night they are together and they actually run over someone with their car, and that person actually dies. And then Nayla starts being haunted by that person. But it's more of like a sci-fi kind of haunting, not just a typical like ghost story haunting. And the concept of this book was so fun, and I was so excited for it because it sounded great. So like the concept and the conversations that it had, great, but the execution didn't really work for me, and sadly I didn't really like it, and I gave it 2.5 stars. Then I read Cloud in a Cornfield 3, The Church of Frendo, which was horror, and it was the third book in a series of slashers. And basically, like in the first one, there is this killer clown called Frendo, and in this one, there is like we're following a character that we have met before, but then we're also following like a whole other group of people. And there are like these followers of Frendo the Killer Clown, which is like the Church of Frendo. And they are very dangerous, basically. And this, like I said, is a slasher, and it's pretty fun. I also really like the first 2 books. And just like the first 2 books, I also gave this one 4 stars. Then I read American Rapture, which was also a horror book. And in this one, we were following Sophie, and she had grown up in a very religious family, and she was like very, very sheltered. She couldn't even, watch the news. And there was like a virus spreading that basically started as the flu, but then the virus mutated. And even though these symptoms still started as a flu, people got very violent as the disease progressed and very sexual, and then they would end up dying from the fever. And when Sophie finds out that that whole thing is happening, like it's already really, really bad. And so she gets in with a group of people, and she's also looking for her brother. And like this was different from what I expected, because on the one hand it was like a survival story that was pretty violent and gruesome, and gory, which was like what I was expecting from it. But at the same time, it was like a coming of age story where we basically saw Sophie kind of like learn about the world and discover things and just see that a lot of the things that she had been taught didn't make any sense. And I really, really loved it. Like, I liked both of the main components of the book. And I also really actually cared about every character in that group of people that she was in. So, like, I actually cared that they were in danger. And, like, I absolutely love this. And the ending actually made me emotional. And yeah, it was like a very surprising book because I was not expecting it to be like so hard hitting and so deep, but I absolutely loved it and I gave it 5 stars. Then I read another horror book, which was called The Eyes Are the Best Part. And in that one, we were following Jiwon, and she was struggling. Like, after her father had left her and her mom and her sister, her family was obviously not doing that well. And she was also like not doing great at school. And then things get worse when her mom starts dating a guy. And basically, like, this is called The Eyes Are the Best Part because her mom, like, she had like started eating fish eyes and she said that like the fish eyes were the best part. And both Jiwon and her sister thought that that was kind of gross. But then Jiwon actually decides to try it one day and she agrees that it's really great. And she then gets obsessed with eyes. See, she is especially obsessed with blue eyes, like the eyes that her mom's boyfriend has. And she starts going like a downward spiral. She is basically losing her sanity, and there were a lot of disgusting scenes in this book that I really, really liked. And it was like pretty disturbing, which was also fun, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read 3 books from the same series, which are An Evil Mind, I Am Death, and The Caller, which are books 6, 7, and 8 in the Robert Hunter series, which is a mystery thriller series where we follow Robert Hunter, who is a homicide detective. And so in the first one, An Evil Mind, I actually have An Evil Mind. I think it's the last one that I have physically, but I don't have it here. And I mean, I don't actually have it as in it's not mine, but I borrowed it from a friend. But I don't have it here. I have it at my place. So I'll just put the cover of the book here. So yeah, in that one, there is like an accident and the car that is crashed into, like, it is open and it is revealed that there are 2 heads inside of it. And so that obviously leads to an investigation. And the guy that was taken into custody says that he'll only talk to Robert Hunter. Even though that is not the city or even the state where Robert works, he says that he will only talk to Robert Hunter. So he's called and he goes to that other city to investigate. And he actually learned that that guy only wanted to talk to Hunter because they used to know each other in the past when they were in college. And so there's an investigation happening, obviously, that leads to basically a serial killer. And the interesting part in that, like, was different from this book to the others is that we didn't, like, we already knew who the who was, like, who had done it. We were more investigating like the why, and it was definitely like interesting the why like that person was doing it in that specific way. And we also had like someone to still save. And yeah, it was really, really fun. Like, I really, really liked it. The only reason why I didn't give it 5 stars was because Robert's partner like was not there working with him, and I really missed their dynamic. But other than that, like, I loved it, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Then in the next one, which is called I Am Death, this one was already like back where he usually works. And in this book, there was a girl who was babysitting that was kidnapped, and then her body is found at an airport, and there was like something left behind for police to find. And basically, like, this killer leaves a message saying I am death in his victims. And we also see a young boy being kidnapped. And in this one, we get to see not only like the physical violence of these crimes, because these books are like very gory, very descriptive. And in this end, we also get to see like the psychological violence that like these victims went through. And in this one, we had like Hunter and Garcia's dynamic back, which I appreciated, but like overall, like as a book, I didn't love it as much as the previous one, but I still had a great time and I gave it 4 stars. And then the last one of the series that I read was The Caller. And in this one, like, people would get video calls from either like a husband or a wife or a sister or a friend, you know, a loved one. And they, in that video call, like the person who called or supposedly called would be like tied up, and there was someone behind the phone with a distorted voice saying that they would be asking two very simple questions, and if the person answered right, they would let their loved one go, and if they answered wrong, they would, kill them. And they always got the first answer right, and they always got the second answer wrong. So, they always had to watch it happen. And this one was also very, like I said, the series is very gruesome, very descriptive with the killing scenes. And the investigation was also very interesting. And in this one, like, there was someone who was like connected to one of the cases that also had like a very shady business, so that also was interesting to see like how that unfolded. And I actually really liked the ending of this one because it had to do with that. And yeah, it was also very fun, and they also gave this one 4 stars. Then I read The Queen, which was a horror book, and we were following Margaret, and it actually starts with Margaret like trying to run away from something, or like not really run away, but like trying to hide from something. And then we flash back a couple days, and her best friend had disappeared like a while ago, and Margaret was, still trying to figure out what had happened to her. And one day she gets like a new phone on her doorstep, and she gets a phone and she's contacted, and it seems that the person who's contacting her is her best friend that went missing. And then we learned that her best friend had actually been part of a like gene manipulation experiment. And there are like in this book, the things that she was actually running from were like human insect hybrids. And yeah, this one was also like pretty gross in the best way possible. And like at first I was really confused and then wasn't really connecting to anything, but the second half was like way more fun, and I ended up actually enjoying it, and I gave it 3.5 stars. Then I read A Reckless Oath, which was book 2 of the Heartless Fates, I think, trilogy. And this one was fantasy, and we are following Kala, who is a witch. And just like any witch, her fate is connected to the witch's dice, which means that she basically literally like rolls dice, and the result is connected to her fate. And her fate actually seems to be connected to a future war with the gods that might actually lead to the end of her people. So she, obviously doesn't like her fate, and she wants to change it. And she then meets a prince who's actually also looking to change his fate, and he knows of someone in the Neverending Forest who might be able to help them. And so in the first book, we see them going to the Neverending Forest and like going through a bunch of trials to get to that person that might be able to help them. And in the second book, they are all kind of in trouble, and we also follow Kala's 2 best friends, and they're also struggling. And we follow one of them specifically like a lot. And I think in the third book, we're going to follow the other. And in this book, there are like other creatures, not just witches. There are like sirens, there are Valkyries. Every time I talk about this book, I think there's something that I'm forgetting about. But yeah, we see a lot more of the world. We learn about a lot of those other creatures, like other than the witches. And it was really fun. I really liked it. And the ending was like pretty crazy. And the epilogue was also pretty crazy. So yeah, I had a really good time, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Alien Clay, which was sci-fi, and in this one we see the main character being taken to Kiln, which is a planet that is basically used as a prison. And he's being taken there because he was part of a political activist group that was found out, and so the members of that group are being taken to Kiln. And when they get to Kiln, they see that there are like some buildings, some structures that have like writing on it, and the writing and even the buildings themselves couldn't really have been done by the animal-like creatures that are native from Kiln, but it also wasn't made by the humans because it was already there when humans got there. So the people in charge want to find out like who made those things, and so they use the prisoners to basically explore the planet. And the planet is like pretty dangerous. The native wildlife is pretty dangerous, and it can also like it can affect people obviously physically, but it also can affect people psychologically. And so it is, like I said, pretty dangerous, and we see the characters go through that and exploring. And I loved the like reveal plot twist thing at the end. I thought it was really cool, and I loved it. I had a great time. I also thought that the main character that we're following was a very interesting character to follow, and yeah, had a great time, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Then I read The Only Survivors, which was a mystery thriller, and in this one we were following the survivors of like an accident that happened when they were on a road trip in school. And there, at first there were like 9 survivors, but 2 of them had already died in the meantime, and now there were only 7. And they got together like every year to, I guess, celebrate that they survived that. And this year is no exception. They get together as well, but there is someone like sending them messages, and there's someone who's obviously kind of like stalking and is out to get them. And so they are having to figure out who that is and why they are trying to get them. And like this was fun, but it wasn't anything like mind blowing, anything crazy. So like I liked it, but I didn't like absolutely love it, and I gave it 3.5 stars. Then I read The Weavers of Alamaxa, and this was the second book in the Alamaxa duology, which was fantasy. And we were following in this series duology, 2 main characters. And the first one was Nahil, and she was a water weaver, and she really wanted to go to the academy to learn more about their powers and learn how to use her powers better. But her family, like, they just wanted her to marry some rich guy, and that guy was Nico. And so Nico was actually in love with someone else, a woman called Georgina. And Georgina was an earth weaver, and she had like very strong but very uncontrollable powers. But since Nico is in love with someone else and Nahil wants to go to the academy, neither of them really want to get married, but they kind of have to. But so they make a deal that he will like sign the papers for her to go to the academy, and he can be with Georgina basically, because it is just an arrangement. And Georgina is actually part of a women's rights group that is called the Daughters of Izahar. And then he also gets involved with that group. And so they're basically like not only fighting for their rights, but also they start fighting someone who really like comes from another kingdom and like really, really hates weavers. So they're also, fighting for their lives. And in this book, they are still fighting for their lives in the second book. And especially like one of the 2 main characters is in like a really, really terrible situation. And like the second book had a lot of action, which was really, really fun. I really enjoyed it. And you also like still had enough time like with the characters to, connect to them and get to know them better and see like their friendships and other relationships evolve. And the ending, not like the very ending, but something that happened a little before, like there's something that I really did not see coming. Like it really took me by surprise. And then the ending itself was like pretty bittersweet. It wasn't, a happy ending, but that was kind of what I was expecting from this story, and I think it like worked pretty well. So yeah, I did really like this one, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Children of Blood and Bone, which is the first book in the Legacy of Orisha, I think that's what it's called, trilogy. And it is fantasy. And years ago, like before the start of this book, the king like destroyed magic and ordered the death of every magi, aka the people who had magic, and that includes Zayli's mother. And so now Zayli, she like was supposed to have magic because she came from a lineage of people that had magic, but since magic was destroyed, she obviously doesn't. But then she meets the princess Amari, and she learns of a way that could bring magic back. And so Zayli, Amari, and Zane, who is Zayli's brother, they go like on a sort of quest to find like all of the ingredients that they need to bring magic back. But they have to fight kind of Inan, who is Amari's brother, so like the prince, because he doesn't want magic back. He basically agrees with his father that it's too dangerous for people to have magic, and so they have to kind of fight. And the ending is like pretty crazy, pretty explosive, and like there's everything. There's death, there's betrayal, there's fighting. And I really, really liked it. And I especially loved Amari and Zayli, like absolutely love them. And yeah, really, really like this book, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Then I read Warbreaker, which is part of the Cosmere universe, which is fantasy, and I have no idea how to talk about this book in a like concise way because there is so much happening, and every time I try to talk about this book, I spend like 5 minutes just trying to introduce what it's about, but I'm gonna try to be faster now. So basically, we start following Ciri, who is the youngest child of a king, and she is basically unimportant, as she says, because all of her other siblings have like the important positions, they have the important things, and she's just there, living her life being unimportant, which she loves. And her older sister is actually supposed to marry the God King from like another kingdom that has gods, obviously. And that is supposed to like prevent a war between the kingdom of the gods and their own kingdom. but her father, or like their father, actually decides to not send that one, who's called Vivenna, to marry the God King and send Ciri instead. And so Ciri, he's not unimportant anymore. She's going to marry the God King, and she's going to a place that she doesn't know, and she basically has not been prepared for this her entire life, like her sister had been. And she's just thrown in there. And so we meet the God King and meet other gods, and basically like the magic in this world is connected to breaths, which are kind of like a life force that people can take from others. And like the gods have a lot of breaths, and the God King has like the most breaths. That's why he's so powerful. And breaths can also be like used on inanimate objects to animate them, basically. And it's also like connected to colors and like seeing colors better and creating colors. And like I said, this was all like the marriage was to prevent a war, but there are still people who want this war to start. And so we are also trying to figure out who those people are and why they want this war to start. And like there is a lot going on. There is so much going on in this book. And at first I was very confused, as always in a new fantasy world. But as soon as I figured out the basics of what was happening, I was like hooked. And I loved it. I had like the 5-star feelings from the beginning, basically. And I just really, really love this book. I love the world. I love the magic. I love the characters. I loved everything. And I gave it 5 stars. Then I read Blood Justice, which was book 2 of the Blood That's trilogy series. I don't really know, but it's fantasy. And in the series, we follow 2 twins who are Christina and Clem. And in the first book, they think that their mom is sick. But like, she is sick. But she's not just sick, like she's sick because she was cursed. So basically they have to figure out like who cursed her and like how to reverse that curse and like who is out to get them, basically. And there's also like a rival family of their family that we meet, and we meet a bunch of people from that family as well. Also a bunch of people from Chris and Clem's family, obviously. And Chris and Clem, like, they have very different relationships to their magic, because Chris, like, she used to be super skilled with her magic and use it all the time, but then a spell that she cast actually caused her father's death, so she is, understandably kind of traumatized by using her magic, and she doesn't really use it anymore. And on the other hand, Clem, he uses his magic all the time, even though he was never like as skilled as his sister. He uses it all the time, especially like as an escape from, real life. And in the second book, like the first one ended in a like very crazy, explosive way. And so in this second one, we are dealing with the aftermaths of that, and also with another family that has now kind of appeared and having issues with these other families. And there's also a group of like anti-magic protesters that they have to deal with. And one of the main characters is like on a very serious revenge plan, and we can basically see how that character, like the darker side of that character, and like how far they're willing to go for their plan. And I really, really liked it. I really like the 2 main characters, and the ending of this book, absolutely insane. And like, I thought this was gonna be a duology, but it better not be. Like, it can't be, that's why I don't know if it's a trilogy or what, but it can't be a duology, because this book ended in a crazy way, and it cannot end here, basically. But yeah, I did really like the book, and I also gave this one 4 stars. Then I read Christmas and Other Horrors, which was a horror short story collection that had 18 short stories. And like, yes, they were mostly about Christmas, but the actual, concept of the book was to be horror stories of the winter solstice. And they were basically based on like dark, lesser known, I think, at least I didn't really know them, myths and legends like surrounding Christmas. And we had like stories from 18 different authors, and like 5 of them I really liked. The other were just okay. I don't think there was any that I like really, really disliked, but mostly they were just okay. And I really like that there was like at the end of every story there was like a paragraph or 2 of the author explaining like what inspired them to write the story. So I really liked that addition. But yeah, it was fun, but it was nothing like crazy. It wasn't like my favorite short story collection, but it was fun, and I gave it 3.5 stars. Then I read Mirrored Heavens, which was the 3rd and last book in the Between Earth and Sky trilogy, which is fantasy. And this series, at first, is mostly set in the holy city of Tova. And in that city, the Sun Priest foresees that an upcoming celestial event will, like, bring the like a big change in the world. And then we're also following a ship captain called Shiala, and she is transporting a very mysterious, very important passenger to Tova. And that passenger is called Serapio, and he's like connected to a god, but not the sun god. And he is gonna be part of that big change that comes in the world. And I really like the previous two books in the series for different reasons. The first one was very action packed, it was like a lot of things happening. And the second one was definitely slower, but we learned a lot about the politics and the world and the characters and the magic and everything. And this one like had a lot of everything. And in this one, we actually explored a lot more of the world, even because the characters were all in different places and like traveling from place to place. And we actually got to see a lot of the world and even follow more characters and also learn more about the past and connections among the characters that we didn't know about before. And I really, really liked it. And the ending was definitely bittersweet, and especially one of the main characters had an ending that I was not expecting. But again, I thought it was the perfect ending for this book. And I also gave this one 4.5 stars. Then I read Ghostsmith. And so in this series, or this duology, we start off by following Ren. And she is a bonesmith. And she is entering a competition to become a Valkyr, who are like specialized soldiers, basically. And she actually doesn't manage to become a Valkyr because, not because she doesn't have the skill, but because she's kind of betrayed, and so she doesn't get to become a Valkyr. And then she hears that the prince has been kidnapped and taken beyond the wall, and so she wants to prove herself, and she decided that she's going to rescue the prince. And as she is on that mission, she actually meets an ironsmith, and ironsmiths and bonesmiths are historically not friends, but they have to work together. And when they are beyond the wall, they actually see that there are like a whole group of people that should not exist and magic that should not exist. And so in this book, they have to deal with that, and also like some betrayal that happens, and some people that want that magic that shouldn't exist. And we learn a lot about like Ren and her past and her family, and also like past connections. And like I liked it, I just didn't like it as much as I expected to, because I gave the first book 5 stars, so I had like very high expectations. But I still did really, really enjoy it, and I did like the ending as well, and I gave it 4 stars. Now there are gonna be a bunch of like Christmas horror books because I read a bunch of them. And so the next book that I'm gonna be talking about is I Found Christmas Lights Slithering Up My Street. And in this one, we are following a young boy, I think he was called Douglas, and he was trying to like bring back the magic cheer to his parents because something had happened like the year before and they were not really excited for Christmas. But he was like decorating with Christmas lights outside, and then he found Christmas lights like in the sewer, and he pulled them out. And then the Christmas lights started slithering up his street, and there were like people singing Christmas carols that were connected to the lights, and they were like killing people and hurting people and following them. And we were just seeing them, like Douglas and his friends, trying to survive the lights. And like it was fun, it was okay. I mean, it was also like sad, like it was fun, but it was sad because like it was way more sad than I expected. But like overall, the story was okay. Like I had a decent time, but it was nothing, crazy, and I gave it 3 stars. Then I read Candy Cane Kills, which was another Christmas horror book. And in this one, there was a family that was like renting a house for Christmas Eve, and they were also trying to bring back the cheer, the happiness to their family because they were not really loving each other's company. And in that house that they rented like years ago, there had been like the candy cane killings is what people call them. Basically, people had died there, and I think the house had been burned down and then like it was rebuilt. And basically, like Candy Cane is back and it is there to kill them. And this is kind of a slasher because then like more people appear, like friends and stuff. So there's like a bigger group of people, and it's kind of a slasher. And yeah, this one was really fun. I also really like the people who like made it out in the end, and I had a fun time, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Krampus, the Yule Lord, and in this one we start off by following Krampus, and he's basically like out to get Santa Claus, and he wants to get like Santa's bag, like the one where he takes the presents from, back because it used to belong like to his family, Krampus's family, and he wants it back. And then we start following a human called Jesse who is struggling financially and is also like struggling because he wants to get like his wife and his kid back, and he actually finds Santa's bag, and he realizes that it is magic and he can like get his hand there and like take whatever he wants. And then Krampus finds him and they start like working together against both Jesse's enemies and like Krampus's enemies. And like it was okay, but I was kind of bored, honestly. And like I did like when we got the backstory of why Krampus hated Santa Claus and like how they were connected. I did like that, but everything else, like the present, I didn't really care about. I didn't really connect to Jesse or like his storyline. So like it was okay. I liked it, but I didn't love it, and I gave it 3 stars. Then I read The Visitor, which was like pretty short. And in this one, there was like a pretty big snowstorm, and there is a character who crashes his car, and then someone helps him and like tells him to go to a diner with him that is like just up the street. And they go there, they get to the diner, and there's like 4 or 5 people in there. And then the visitor appears, this creature, this alien, and it starts basically killing them, hunting them, and these characters are trying to survive, and like that's what it's about. And like I couldn't have cared less about anyone other than the dog. And yeah, I didn't really have a good time. I didn't really love it. I didn't really care. I didn't really like it. And I had at first given it 2.5 stars, but I think I'm actually gonna give it 2 stars because yeah, I didn't really like it. Then I read Snow, in which there was another snowstorm, but in this case, the characters were like at an airport and flights were cancelled. And a group of 4 characters that were like going on the same flight, they actually decided to rent a car to get to where they were going. But the car also, I think, breaks down. And then they find someone who like guides them to a town where people are not really themselves anymore. And then they find some people who are still like themselves, still fully human, and are like hiding and trying to survive. And they say that something came in the snow that got inside of those other people and started like controlling them, and that is why they are the way that they are. And so basically we see these characters trying to survive. This one was way more fun for me. I enjoyed this one way more, and I also really loved the ending of this one. I thought it was perfect. And yeah, this one was much more my thing, and I gave it 4 stars. And then the last Christmas horror book was The Ritual. And this one was like 17 pages. It was a short story. And basically, like, if people woke up on Christmas Day and there was like a huge bell on the center of their town, it means that they had to perform a ritual. And so we see them perform the ritual and like what the ritual is about. And like, it's pretty gruesome and pretty creepy. And it was, very fun. And then the ending made things even creepier. So it was pretty short, but it was very fun. And I had a good time with it. And I also gave it 4 stars. And then I read Piranesi, which was fantasy. And this was such a confusing book. Like, it started off with our main character who, like, his real name wasn't really Piranesi, or like, we didn't really know what his name was. He didn't even really know, but like, he was called Piranesi by someone. And basically, he knew that in the world there were 15 people, or like he knew of the existence of 15 people, and out of those 15, 13 were dead, and there was him, Piranesi, and the other. He just called him the other. And they lived in like a huge house that he called the world. Like the house was the world. And it had like hundreds of rooms. It was like infinite, basically. It had like oceans, tides, it had everything. It had a maze. It was pretty much a world, but it was still a house. And there is like signs of a 16th person existing, and basically the other tells Piranesi that that other person, the 16th person, is actually pretty dangerous and that he should not interact with that person. And like in the first half of this book, I was so confused. Like I was very intrigued, but I was so confused. And then in the second half, I actually understood what was happening, and I was still very intrigued to see where it would go. And yeah, it was very fun. It was really interesting, really interesting concept, and I had a lot of fun, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read The Dead Cattail Assassins, which was also fantasy, and this one was shorter, and we're following Aveen, who was one of the Dead Cattail Assassins. And so, yes, she was an assassin. She was not a cat, but she was dead, and like actually dead. And basically like she had made some sort of deal with the goddess of knives, I think, and she was working for that goddess, and she didn't remember anything of her past life. It's part of the deal. Like, she doesn't remember who she is or how she died, and like people that knew her wouldn't recognize her. It's all part of the deal. And she is like on a mission, and she sees someone that actually triggers a memory, and that should not even be allowed, but it's happening, and she has to figure out why that's happening. And basically, the person who hired her for that mission is like out to get her, basically, and she has also to figure out why and how to fix everything. And yeah, I was really invested. I thought it was really, really fun, and I really like the world and this magic. I thought it was really fun as well, and I had a good time, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read Wayward, which was also fantasy, and in this one we follow 3 women in the 3 different time periods, and they were all part of the same family. And so we actually start following Kate in the present, I think it's 2019, and then we also follow Violet in 1942 and Alpha in 1619. And so Kate is running away from an abusive relationship, and she decides to go stay at the house that used to belong to her great aunt, Violet. And Violet in 1942 is pretty young. I think she's like 16 maybe. And she is like, her father wants her to be like his definition of a proper young lady, who is not like who Violet is. And she like doesn't know anything about her mom. She only knows that she died when Violet was, I think, 1 year old, and she starts finding more things out about her mom and the possible powers that she had. And then in 1619, Altha is being tried for witchcraft and murder. And basically, they are all, like I said, part of the same family. They do all have, witchy powers, but only Altha knows about it. And I was pretty invested in all of the plot lines, although Kate was definitely the one I was the least interested in. And I think that's because her storyline was the less witchy one. And basically, we saw them like, Kate and Violet like discovering more about themselves and their family and like powers that they had. And Alpha not so much, because she knew it, but she still had to like figure out a way to overcome her situation. And I did really, really, really like it. I really like the main characters that we're following, like I said, especially Violet and Alpha. And I really like how they overcame their situations, and how like everything was kind of connected in the end, like all the stories, even though they were set in very different times, even different centuries, they were kind of connected. And I really like how everything came together. And yeah, I really, really liked it, and I gave it 4.5 stars. And now finally, our final book was Five Survive, which was a mystery thriller. And in that one, we were following a group of 6 friends who were on like a road trip in an RV. And they were actually, I think, going to a campsite, and they were going during the night. And then they got like lost, and they had like no service, no internet, no anything, no GPS signal, and they were like completely lost. And then they got like a flat tire, and they stopped to check what was happening. And then they realized that there was a sniper there, a shooter, trying to kill one of them. And basically, they were communicating with a walkie-talkie with the person who was there to get whoever they wanted. And basically, they said that they wanted one of them who had a secret, and they wanted that secret and that person. And the book was like them discussing amongst themselves, like trying to figure out who it was, and also like trying to survive. And we know that one of them doesn't survive, because they were 6, and the book is called Five Survive. And like, it was definitely like thrilling. I was like on the edge of my seat the whole time, but I also thought it was very predictable. Like, the reveal, I like 15% into the book, like I was pretty sure I knew what it was gonna be. And like, I still was hoping it was something else. Like, I was hoping there would be like a big plot twist. But it was that, like, there were other reveals associated with them, which I didn't see coming like as soon, but I also saw them coming like before they were revealed. So, there was that. I thought it was kind of predictable, but it was still very thrilling, and I was, like I said, on the edge of my seat, and I still had a fun time with it. Like, I couldn't stop reading, and I am giving it 3.5 stars. And so yeah, those were the 37 books I read in the last 3 months of 2024. And I actually reached my reading goal of 100 books in the second half of December. So, like, it was pretty close. It was definitely a challenge to get there. And honestly, if I hadn't read all those short Christmas horror books, I don't know if I would have reached it, or at least if I would have reached it like before the last day of the year or something. But I reached it, and I'm happy. And this was a lot of books, and I have been talking for a very long time. So, yeah, that is everything. And happy new year, happy 2025. And yeah, that is everything for this video. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you have enjoyed it. And if you did, give it a like and subscribe, and I will talk to you next time. Bye!